The most savage twist? The man they mocked saved the daughter they destroyed. Everybody thought this would be one of those cliche mafia marriages where the girl suffers and the husband stays cold. Nope, the real betrayal comes from her own blood. The family throws Lila away, the sister poisons her, the mother tries to control her even after marriage, and the villain is the only one who says that no one touches what's mine. That's what makes this story hit so hard. The enemy wears a family name. The safety comes from the man she was supposed to fear.
At the altar, subject Lila Whitmore stands in borrowed attire, presented to a man universally assessed as a casualty. Damian Blackwell's name is a clinical term for failure, visually impaired, physically compromised, and financially insolvent. Her familial unit has disowned her, a negotiable asset to clear their ledgers. The matrimonial arrangement is designed as a terminal social degradation. Yet as Damian removes her veil, his eyes are not vacant. They are precise, arctic, and disquietingly sentient. A cryptic expression signals to Lila that she has entered a psychological construct far more lethal than a loveless contract. Our observation of Lila's subsequent cognitive descent begins. Consider your focus a clinical mandate to observe this case study. The Whitmore residence was a monument to a lifestyle from which Lila was systematically excluded. Visualize sterile marble surfaces and chandeliers representing liquid assets. The ancestral portraits on the walls served as a constant psychological evaluation. Value was quantified by aesthetic appeal, or it was non-existent. By this metric, Lila was a nullity. She was confined to the East Wing in a room her maternal figure deemed adequate. It was more diminutive than the staff's lodging, deliberately obscured. With its sterile composition, it was a space engineered to erase the identity of its occupant. The room contained only a bed, a desk, and a profound silence that absorbed all stimuli. Her sister Savannah's chamber, in contrast, was a curated environment of pink textiles and lacquered wood with a wardrobe capable of housing Lila's entire material footprint. Savannah was cultivated like a commodity, trained in aesthetics and the performance of a flawless smile. Lila was merely warehoused. Nutritional avoidance again. Lila elevates her gaze from the untouched meal. Her mother occupies the doorway, a familiar effigy of disapproval. Evelyn Whitmore is clad in a cream blazer and pearls, poised for executive function before 8 a.m. The woman consistently appeared prepared for a corporate acquisition or a bereavement ceremony. Lila assessed her mother viewed both with equivalent emotional detachment. "I have no appetite," Lila reports. "You never have an appetite. It is the core of your pathology." Lila required no clarification. The diagnosis was memorized. Insufficient mass, excessive pallor, unacceptable fragility. Medical professionals applied a lengthy clinical descriptor for it, a term her mother refused to verbalize. Evelyn articulated only its financial impact. The prescriptions, the specialists, the expenditures that eroded funds for Savannah's social debut and the family's immaculate public image. "Dr. Carver is scheduled for this afternoon," Evelyn states. "Attempt to appear viable." "I always attempt." "No, you appear ill. There is a distinction." Evelyn departs without awaiting a response. This was her methodology. She issued directives to Lila, not engaging in dialogue. She provided critiques and continual reminders that Lila's condition was a significant logistical and financial problem. Lila displaces the tray and gravitates toward the window. Below, the gardens are flawlessly manicured, sculpted by a team of unseen laborers. She had frequented them in childhood before her mother classified her public presence as a liability. Now she only observes from a remote vantage point, a specter viewing a world she was forbidden to access. She can discern Savannah's laughter emanating from the grounds, clear and assertive, the type of auditory signal that dominates any environment it occupies. Lila contemplates the sensation of being a desired presence in a room. When Dr. Carver arrives, Lila is attired in a nondescript sweater and jeans, positioned on her bed for his assessment. He is an older male with a benign countenance and a placid demeanor, but his affability was a billable service. Retained by her mother, his function was to maintain Lila's operational status, not to facilitate her recovery. "How have you been?" he inquires. "Stable." "Sleep patterns?" "Adequate." "And your caloric intake?" Lila hesitates. "It is sufficient." Dr. Carver inputs a notation on his tablet, his expression a professional constant. "Your latest blood analysis has returned. Your biomarkers are stable, but tenuously so. We require greater consistency with your medication protocol." "I adhere to it daily." "I am aware, but your system is not metabolizing it with efficiency. It is probable we will need to increase the dosage again." This information was another confirmation of her escalating burden. More pharmaceuticals, greater expense, more data for her mother's argument that she was causing their financial ruin. "I understand," Lila vocalizes. The doctor rises. "I will confer with your mother about the new regimen. For now, rest. And please, ingest nutrients. You are severely underweight." He exits, and the silence re-infiltrates the room. She remains supine, visually mapping the ceiling, tracing the network of fissures in the plaster. She had committed them to memory years prior. 14 fractures radiating like dark, intricate vascular structures. They remained unrepaired. No individual of consequence ever entered this space to observe them. From the lower level, she could detect the ambient sounds of her family unit, the low frequency of her father's voice, the sharp cadence of her mother's. Savannah's laugh once more. It was the soundtrack to a narrative in which she had no role. The evening meal was the standard performance of isolation. Lila was seated at the table's distal end, a peripheral figure to her parents. The food was an elaborate creation from a notable chef. Lila manipulated the contents of her plate while Savannah detailed a philanthropic event and a new garment she was commissioning. "It's a bespoke item," Savannah stated, dissecting her steak with conditioned elegance. "Ivory silk with gold embroidery. The couturier projects a 2-week completion." "How excellent," Evelyn replied, directing a smile at Savannah that Lila had never experienced. Richard Whitmore, her father, emitted a sound of affirmation. His presence was one of physical mass rather than emotional warmth. His features appeared sculpted from rock. He managed his real estate conglomerate with the same cold logic he applied to his family. Every interaction was a transaction, stripped of effect. "Lila." Her head moved sharply at her mother's incisive tone. "Dr. Carver reports your nutritional intake is insufficient. I am consuming food, not in any meaningful quantity." Evelyn set down her silverware. "You must approach this with seriousness. We cannot continue to escalate your medication solely because you refuse to cooperate." "I am cooperating." "Then why is there no improvement in your condition?" Lila possessed no response her mother would process. The reality that the pharmaceuticals were debilitating, that the exhaustion was chronic, that it was difficult to maintain hope when your own family treats you as an apparition was an inaudible internal scream. "I will exert more effort," Lila whispered, the words barely registering. Evelyn had already redirected her focus to her meal. "Ensure that you do." The exchange was terminated. Savannah resumed speaking about a high-value male she had encountered, the heir to an investor. Evelyn was immediately invested, posing questions, formulating strategies. Richard feigned attention, his gaze fixed on his mobile device. Lila consumed what she was able before quietly excusing herself. Her departure went unacknowledged. In her room, her sole refuge, she ingested her medication and retreated to bed, though it was shortly after 8. The drugs induced a welcome state of lethargy. Non-consciousness was preferable to being aware. To be aware was to analyze. An analysis meant confronting the reality of her confinement. She was in a deep, chemically induced sleep when the vocalizations began. Initially, she processed it as a dream until her mother's enraged voice permeated the house from downstairs. Her father's deeper tone countered, equally hostile. Lila sat upright, her heart rate accelerating, and moved cautiously to her door. "This is pathological, Richard. You cannot be entertaining this. There are no alternative options. You are aware of what he is. Then he can take Savannah. She was the one he originally sought. He did not request Savannah. He requested a daughter from this house. And we are both cognizant that, after all considerations, Savannah is too valuable an asset to expend on that individual." A concentration of cold dread formed in Lila's abdomen. She pressed her ear against the door, suppressing her respiration. "So you will simply transfer the defective one?" Evelyn's voice was pure acid, laced with contempt. "The one who is already draining our resources?" "I am executing a logical business maneuver. Blackwell is a non-entity. This is public knowledge. He is blind, insolvent, and facing total collapse. Marrying him to Lila resolves 2 issues. We finalize the agreement, and she ceases to be our financial liability." A long, strained silence ensued. Then, Evelyn laughed, a sound that was sharp, brittle, and dissonant. "Agreed," she stated. "But let us not misrepresent the nature of this action. We are disposing of her. We are being pragmatic. We are being monstrous. Then let us be monstrous. I am indifferent. I just require this concluded." Lila recoiled from the door, trembling. She was not surprised, not in a clinical sense. She had always perceived her status as a liability. But to hear it articulated with such cold exactitude, to hear her own mother's swift consent, felt like an internal structural fracture. She did not achieve sleep for the remainder of the night. She lay fixated on the darkness, their words replaying in a loop until they degraded into a meaningless, searing static. The day begins with her mother, Evelyn, positioned in the doorway like a negative portent. "Arise," she commands, her tone devoid of any maternal affect. "Adorn yourself appropriately. We have an engagement." When Lila ventures to inquire about the destination, the response is a stark, "You will be informed upon arrival." Conditioned for compliance, Lila merely dresses and proceeds downstairs to her assigned outcome. A black vehicle, polished to a funereal sheen, was waiting. The journey was a study in unvoiced hostility, navigating through an unfamiliar sector before halting at a singular corporate edifice. "What is this location?" Lila inquires quietly. Her mother delivers the verdict. "You are about to be introduced to your future spouse." Lila's subjective experience of time decelerated to a halt. What? But Evelyn was already in motion, advancing into the lobby, compelling Lila to follow in her trajectory. A private elevator ascended to the highest floor, its doors revealing a corridor that resonated with immense corporate power and classified information. Her mother knocked once on a pair of formidable doors, then proceeded inside as if possessing clearance. The office was expansive, offering a commanding panorama of the city below. There, framed by the window, stood a dominant figure in a dark suit. His turn triggered a cognitive fracture. The narrative of a frail, broken subject was a meticulous deception. She now faced Damien Blackwell, a man exuding authority, with sculpted features and a sharp, unnerving focus. "Mrs. Whitmore," he stated, his resonant voice commanding the space. "I presume this is Lila." Evelyn produced a practiced smile. "Mr. Blackwell, we thank you for your time." He bypassed the pleasantry. "I approved no meeting. You pleaded. I permitted it." The quiet reframing was delivered with clinical precision. Evelyn's polished facade faltered. "Indeed," she continued. "As previously stated, Lila is suitable for the arrangement." Damien's analytical gaze returned to Lila. "Suitable, a peculiar descriptor." Lila experienced a creeping depersonalization, feeling like an itemized asset in a liquidation. He moved from behind the desk with measured, deliberate steps. His presence was formidable, not from overt aggression, but from the unnerving intellect in his stare. "Are you aware of the reason for your presence here?" he inquired. Lila replied, "My mother stated I was to meet my intended husband." "And what is your assessment of that?" he probed. For a brief, defiant moment, she weighed the truth. "I believe my assessment is not a stipulated term of this contract." A subtle signal, possibly acknowledgement, crossed Damien's face. "Your observation is correct," he conceded. "To them, it is not." Anxious to finalize the transaction, Evelyn interjected, "Mr. Blackwell, regarding the stipulations—" "The stipulations are unambiguous," Damien interrupted, his gaze fixed on Lila. "Your family's status is restored. I acquire a wife. This one." Evelyn's assent was immediate and relieved. "The transaction is complete." Damien's attention finally moved to her mother. "The event will occur in 2 weeks. I will manage all logistics. Your sole function is to ensure her attendance." "Her attendance is assured." "Excellent." Damien retrieved a file from his desk. "Our business is concluded." Evelyn assented, already moving toward the exit. "Lila, come." But Lila's entire psychological framework had been inverted. The rumored invalid was the architect of this entire affair. "Lila!" Her mother's sharp directive pierced her stupor. She complied in a state of profound disorientation. In the vehicle, Evelyn messaged rapidly while Lila replayed Damien's gaze, which had perceived a resilience in her she had yet to recognize. "This arrangement resolves everything," Evelyn murmured, a self-directed affirmation. "It must." Lila understood this precisely. She was the payment, the human collateral for her family's continued social viability. At their residence, her sister Savannah waited, her expression one of intense anger. "You met him?" she demanded. Evelyn moved past her. "The agreement is binding." "That was to be my agreement." "It is not. Accept it." Savannah then redirected her rage toward Lila. "Do you feel significant now? Does a union with some decrepit man grant you importance?" Lila remained silent, her capacity for their histrionics depleted. "You are simply pathetic," Savannah hissed before departing. Lila remained immobile, an apparition in her own home, so habituated to their toxicity it barely registered. The subsequent 2 weeks passed in a dissociative haze. She was fitted for garments she had no role in selecting and informed of guest lists she was not permitted to view. The ultimate indignity was the wedding dress. It was not new. It was the garment created for Savannah months prior for this exact event. It was merely altered for Lila, a constant material reminder that she was and had always been the secondary option. On the day preceding the wedding, she observed a stranger in her reflection. The gown, intended to be ornamental, felt like a costume for a role she had not consented to. Her mother, Evelyn, adjusted the veil with the detached objectivity of a technician. "It is adequate." This was the entirety of her blessing. No comment on her appearance, merely a confirmation of her suitability for the function. The ceremony was held in their garden, now populated by unfamiliar individuals. The floral arrangements were impressive but lacked any celebratory scent. A string quartet performed a nondescript piece as Lila proceeded down the aisle unaccompanied. Her father had cited a last-minute business matter as more critical than his daughter's nuptials, so she walked alone in a repurposed dress toward a man she had met once, while her family observed with a mixture of indifference and profound relief. Damien waited, impeccably dressed. His expression was neither content nor anxious. It was a mask of sheer resolve. When she arrived, he took her hand. His grip was firm, its warmth an unexpected tactile input. The officiant began speaking, but the words were an indistinct drone. Her focus was on Damien and his method of observation. It was not the look one gives a possession or a liability. He was simply observing. "Do you, Lila Whitmore, take this man?" The query hung in the air. For one chaotic moment, she contemplated refusal, of collapsing the entire construct. But to what end? "I do," she verbalized. "And do you, Damien Blackwell, take this woman?" His response was immediate and resolute. "I do. I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." He moved closer, and Lila braced for impact, shutting her eyes. But the kiss was purely a procedural act, a brief, sterile contact of his lips that concluded the instant it began. The reception presented a different form of psychological stress. Lila sat beside Damien as a series of associates offered him congratulations and gave her the cautious smiles reserved for fragile objects. Her own family maintained a calculated distance. Savannah was absent entirely. Evelyn remained for precisely 1 hour before departing with a flimsy excuse. By the conclusion, Lila felt utterly depleted. Damien rose, offering his hand once more. "It is time." "What is our destination?" "Home." She trailed him to a waiting sedan. He held her door before entering himself, and the vehicle pulled away from the residence. Lila watched her former home recede into the deepening twilight. The journey felt protracted, moving through districts of immense wealth before halting at a set of large, automated gates. The car ascended a long drive toward a sprawling contemporary structure that resembled a high-security installation more than a home. In reality, the term mansion was insufficient. It was an expansive, sharp-angled construct of glass and black steel, an architectural statement that was either a fantasy or an exceptionally well-designed containment facility. The vehicle stopped, and Damien exited to open her door. As Lila stepped out, observing the colossal building, she felt a profound sense of scale diminishment. "This is your house," she whispered. "This is our house," he corrected. He guided her through a foyer larger than her previous living room, down a corridor of museum-quality art, and into a great room with a glass wall overlooking the city. The vista was vertiginous, a vast expanse of light reaching a dark horizon. "Sit," Damien instructed, indicating a sofa. She complied. He stood before her, evaluating her. "I presume you are contemplating the next phase," he stated. "I have no specific expectations." "Good. That simplifies matters." He moved to the window, his form silhouetted against the urban glow. "Your family believes I am financially compromised, ruined, desperate, and blind. That is the exact narrative I compensated them to accept." Lila was disoriented. "What are you implying?" Damien turned, his eyes meeting hers in the low light. "I originated those rumors myself. I needed to observe their behavior when they perceived me at my most vulnerable. As projected, they revealed their underlying motivations, liquidating you as an asset without hesitation." A tightening sensation formed in Lila's throat. "I don't understand." "I am not a fool, Lila, nor am I remotely insolvent." He approached her again, his presence dominating the space. "This was always the intended outcome for both of us." "Then why was I selected?" "Because you were the asset they were willing to sacrifice." The words were delivered not with cruelty, but as a statement of stark fact. "I have no use for their ideal," Damien continued. "I only require you to comprehend one principle. You are no longer their liability. You are mine, and I consistently secure my assets." Lila could only stare at him, her mind struggling to process this new paradigm. Her psychological reality had fractured beyond recognition. "I don't know what you require of me," she breathed. "Nothing," Damien stated. "For the present, simply inhabit this space. Familiarize yourself with the environment. We will address subsequent protocols as they arise." He turned and was gone, leaving her in a living area of immense proportions. For a long time, Lila sat, contemplating her exchange of one gilded cage for another. But as the city lights activated, she conceded that this new enclosure, at a minimum, offered a superior view. That, perhaps, was a variable. She awoke the next morning in an unfamiliar bed, in a room so vast it felt like the beginning of a separate existence. The bed linens possessed an unusually smooth texture, a tactile shift from her previous reality. Light saturated the room through massive windows, momentarily erasing her identity. Then the cognitive components reassembled. The ceremony, Damien, this structure that seemed like a cinematic construct. She rose with deliberation, her muscles taut with deep-seated stress. The room itself, a study in severe modernism, had a clinical sterility. The pristine loneliness of an unoccupied luxury suite. A large wardrobe along one wall stood slightly ajar, suggesting a predetermined life awaiting her. The subject exhibited signs of cognitive dissonance upon identifying her former attire, remnants of a previous subordinate life. A percussive sound at the door elicited a startled response. She vocalized consent for entry. An operative, presenting as a middle-aged woman named Helen, entered with practiced composure, identifying herself as the household manager. Her stated purpose to assess the subject's condition at Mr. Blackwell's directive. The designation Mrs. Blackwell was introduced, a label the subject perceived as alien. The subject's verbal response, "I'm all right," was reflexive. The operative's facial expression remained neutral as she relayed that sustenance was available. The operative noted that Mr. Blackwell was accessible, but the subject declined intervention, stating a preference for autonomy. Helen acquiesced and proceeded to the wardrobe, revealing its contents. The subject's meager possessions were now juxtaposed with new high-value items, unfamiliar apparel, boxed footwear, and a cashmere garment of obvious expense. The subject correctly identified the new items as not belonging to her, a statement of fact devoid of emotion. Helen classified the new acquisitions as gifts from Mr. Blackwell, framing them as an offer of choice. This concept of choice, so foreign to the subject's history of deprivation, registered as a form of psychological taunting. Left in isolation, the subject performed ablutions in a space exceeding the dimensions of her former living quarters before reverting to her worn, familiar clothing. The new garments remained untouched, perceived not as gifts, but as a more sophisticated form of restraint. Descending into the house, she encountered a profound acoustic void, navigating by olfactory cues to a kitchen of clinical austerity. The environment resembled a sterile set piece constructed of steel and marble. A single serving of food was presented with architectural precision, an object of art. The subject engaged with the food mechanically, noting its superior quality while experiencing acute somatic anxiety. After minimal consumption, she ceased eating, seeking solace in a dark beverage. A male voice observed, "That won't be enough to keep you going." The subject turned to see Damien Blackwell in the doorway, his attire radiating an aura of absolute control and prior accomplishment. The subject admitted to a diminished appetite. "So, I have been told," he replied, demonstrating prior knowledge. He entered the space, procuring his own beverage and assuming a casual posture that belied the intensity of his analytical gaze. His observation of her was likened to the study of a complex problem. The subject inquired as to the source of his information. "I know quite a bit," he stated. "Your family was not very guarded." This prompted a physical reaction. The subject set down her cup. She requested specifics. He recited their assessment. She was fragile, a financial liability, and ultimately disposable. His tone was devoid of emotion, a clinical recitation of fact. The verbalization of this truth, while anticipated, inflicted a fresh psychological wound. "And still, you married me," she articulated, the words barely audible. He explained the union was a diagnostic tool to assess her family's valuation of assets they believed to be worthless. "They threw you away," he concluded. "That was all I needed to learn." When asked what he had learned, Damien paused before delivering a carefully constructed statement designed to induce cognitive dissonance. "That you were the only thing they had that was of any real value." The subject was rendered speechless, processing the statement as a potential form of sophisticated cruelty. His expression, however, remained impassive. "I can't figure you out," she confessed. "You don't have to," he countered, terminating the interaction to attend a meeting. He asserted Helen's availability for assistance, mentioned a library, and granted permission to explore, framing the house as her domain and not a prison. His departure left the subject to ambulate through the mansion, a disoriented figure in an opulent setting. She documented a series of unused guest suites, a dining hall for 20, and a private gymnasium. The aforementioned library was a 2-level repository of literature. She selected a novel attempting to achieve psychological escape beside a window. The narrative concerned a woman rebuilding her life, yet after 3 chapters, the subject exhibited zero information retention. Her cognitions remained fixated on Damien and his objectifying observation of her. At approximately midday, Helen appeared, announcing, "Mrs. Blackwell, you have a visitor." The announcement triggered a significant fear response in the subject. "Who is it?" she asked. The operative replied, "She would not give her name, only that she is family." The word family induced a physiological reaction of cold in the subject's extremities, as it could only signify one individual. She was escorted to the main hall, where Savannah was surveying the environment with a predatory demeanor. The visitor, Savannah, was attired in a manner that projected ambition and hostility. Upon seeing the subject, her facade of composure shifted to one of overt contempt. "Well?" Savannah's voice penetrated the hall's silence. "So, this is the pretty cage you fell into." The subject's response was a subvocal query. "Why are you here?" "I had to see it for myself," the sister retorted with a smirk, her footwear striking the marble floor. "To see what kind of place our family's little embarrassment could buy." She praised the surroundings dismissively. "It's fine, I guess." The subject issued a directive. "You need to leave." "Oh, don't be so dramatic," Savannah replied, confirming her intention to remain before re-engaging the subject with renewed malice. "I'm just here to remind you of your place." "This doesn't change a thing," the antagonist continued her verbal assault. "You're still the weak one, the burden, just a new debt on a different man's books now." The subject experienced a familiar physiological constriction in her chest, a conditioned fear response. Beneath this, however, a nascent flicker of opposition emerged. "If you're done, you can go," Lila stated, her voice exhibiting tremors. Savannah responded with a sharp, derisive laugh. "Look at you! One day in a big house and you think you matter. You don't, and you never will." A third voice interjected, "Is there an issue here?" causing both individuals to react with a start. Damien Blackwell was positioned at the apex of the main staircase, a dominant, shadowed figure. He descended with a controlled, predatory locomotion, positioning himself beside Lila. For a moment, Savannah's aggressive posture faltered. "I was just visiting my sister." "No," Damien corrected with cold finality. "You were trespassing, and you were disrespecting my wife, which means it is time for you to leave." She began to assert a right to be present, but he cut her off. "You have no rights in this house. This is my property. You are not wanted here." He then gestured to Helen, instructing, "Show her out. If she comes back, call security." Helen proceeded with unnerving calm. Savannah's expression calcified as she reevaluated the power dynamic. She directed a final, hostile gaze at Lila before turning and exiting. Helen followed, the sound of the door closing echoing with percussive finality. "I am so sorry," the subject whispered. "I had no idea she would come here." Damien's response was sharp, an instrument not aimed at her but dangerous nonetheless. "You will never apologize for what she does. She is not allowed to come into this house and play out that scene with you. Not ever again." The subject attempted to contextualize the behavior as chronic. "Well, as of tonight, that's over." Lila observed him, stunned by the cold fury in his tone, a reaction that transcended anger into a display of raw, territorial possession. The incident was perceived as an act of vandalism against his property, a violation of a boundary he would defend absolutely. "Why do you even care about this?" Lila inquired weakly. "Because you belong to me now," Damien stated, presenting it as an indisputable law of nature. "And I do not allow anyone to disrespect what is mine." He delivered this with utter conviction. It was in this moment that the subject experienced an internal paradigm shift. While not yet trust, it was the first indication of a potential trauma bond. The subsequent days fell into a routine of his calculated absence and her structured isolation. Her time was predominantly spent within the library, an environment conducive to processing the surreal new parameters of her existence. Helen operated as a discreet, efficient, yet impersonal presence, fostering an atmosphere akin to a high-end custodial facility. On the fourth day, a medical professional was announced. Helen interrupted the subject's reading, stating, "Dr. Monroe is here for you." "What for?" Lila inquired. Mr. Blackwell's arrangement. He felt a thorough examination was in order. The subject offered no protest, following Helen to a sitting room where a woman in her 40s with discerning eyes waited beside a medical kit. "Mrs. Blackwell," the clinician stated, getting to her feet. "I am Dr. Monroe. Your husband arranged for me to see you." "I have a physician," Lila countered, the statement feeling hollow. "Dr. Carver." "Correct, I have his case notes." Dr. Monroe indicated the couch. "Please, this assessment will be brief." Lila complied, feeling like a specimen under observation. The inquiry began, following the predictable, sterile script Dr. Carver always used. "How have you been feeling? Are you resting? Are you adhering to your medication regimen?" Lila delivered her programmed responses, a performance honed by years of clinical neglect. Then Dr. Monroe deviated from the protocol. She became silent, simply observing. Dr. Monroe spoke, her fingers gliding across a digital interface. "Your hematology report presents several acute markers for concern. You are in a state of severe depletion, and your body mass index is critically low. Do the prescribed pharmaceuticals induce adverse reactions?" "On occasion," Lila admitted. "Nausea, profound fatigue." "Specify the frequency." "It is nearly constant." A minimal furrow appeared between Dr. Monroe's eyebrows. "And Dr. Carver was aware of this?" "I informed him." "Did he propose an alternative course of action?" Lila offered a slight shrug. "He stated my system was merely being resistant." "That is not a clinical assessment. It is an abdication of professional responsibility." The doctor set her device aside. "I am ordering a new diagnostic panel, blood profiles, imaging, a full metabolic evaluation, and I am initiating a new therapeutic protocol for you. One with a viable chance of success without systemic degradation." "My mother would never authorize the expenditure," Lila stated, the words a relic of her former existence. "Your mother is not the financially responsible party. Your husband is." Dr. Monroe's objective demeanor was briefly tinged with something resembling compassion. "Mrs. Blackwell, you have been combating this condition with negligible support. That paradigm ceases today. I will provide optimal care, but I require your full disclosure. You must report if a treatment is ineffective. Can you agree to that?" All Lila could produce was a nod, an unfamiliar constriction in her throat. She was unaccustomed to anyone being invested in her recovery. After scheduling a follow-up, the doctor departed, leaving Lila examining the stark business card in her palm. The evening's stillness was disrupted by Damien's arrival. He located Lila on the living room sofa, enveloped in a blanket, her features illuminated by the passive light of a muted film. Wordlessly, he prepared a drink at the wet bar and occupied the chair opposite her. It was Lila who fractured the silence. "Dr. Monroe was here." "I'm aware." "You didn't consult me about changing physicians?" "It was a necessary intervention. Dr. Carver was facilitating your decline." "By what authority do you make that judgment?" Damien raised his glass. "I reviewed your complete medical history. For 3 years, he administered the same ineffectual treatments. No adjustments, no new strategies. He wasn't treating you, he was managing your deterioration. There is a profound distinction." Lila clutched the blanket tighter, a barricade against his analysis. My mother approved of him. Your mother approved of his low fees and his disinclination for thorough inquiry. The precision of his statement landed like a physical impact. Lila understood Evelyn prized the facade of treatment over its inconvenient reality. Her private agony was inconsequential so long as her illness remained contained. What is the purpose of all this? Lila's voice was almost a whisper. This residence, the doctor, you have no familiarity with me. Damien leaned forward, his focus absolute. That is accurate, not entirely. But I know the nature of your family's transaction, and I know that without intervention, you will expire believing you lacked the value to be saved. What if that's true? It is not. The conviction in his tone almost dismantled her psychological defenses. Almost. And I will substantiate it, with or without your cooperation. She offered no response, returning her gaze to the screen, affecting interest in the movie. 2 weeks into their unconventional cohabitation, the new regimen commenced. Dr. Monroe's methodology was divergent and the effects manifested rapidly. The persistent nausea began to recede. The oppressive, cellular-level exhaustion started to lift, incrementally. By any objective measure, she remained unwell, but the sensation of being submerged was abating. She resumed eating, small portions initially, but sufficient to ease the concern from Helen's expression. Sleep came with less resistance, though it was frequently populated by disturbing ideations. Visions of her previous room, her fists striking the sealed door, the sound of her family's footsteps fading away from her appeals for aid. One morning, she awoke at sunrise and discovered Damien in the kitchen, already dressed, a coffee mug in hand. He acknowledged her entry. "You're awake early," he observed. A negative dream state, Lila admitted, pouring her own coffee and taking a seat at the island, studying him across the marble expanse. His shirt sleeves were rolled back, revealing the complex, dark patterns of a tattoo she hadn't previously registered. "May I pose a direct question?" she began. "You may. Why select me? What is the fundamental motive for this arrangement? It transcends my family's desire to dispose of me. There is another variable." Damien put his phone down, his gaze turning clinical. "Are you requesting the complete, unvarnished data?" "Yes. Your family owed me a substantial financial debt. Upon receiving erroneous intelligence that my enterprise was failing, they sought a simplistic resolution. They proposed a marital alliance, assuming I would accept Savannah, and canceled the obligation. I had no interest in Savannah. I presented them with an option, a method to reveal which daughter they classified as expendable. They provided your name, Layla, without hesitation." So the entire event was a psychological test. It was an evaluation of their character, not yours. Damien leaned back. How an individual treats an entity they perceive as worthless? That is a true diagnostic. Your family failed that evaluation spectacularly. And what was your final assessment? That you were entitled to a superior outcome, and that I was the only agent present with the will to provide it. Layla simply stared at him. You lack sufficient data to determine what I am entitled to. Perhaps, but I know you were entitled to more than they are offering. It was not a romantic overture, nor was it simple altruism. It was a cold, objective conclusion, and that, for some reason, made it far more palatable. "So what is the next phase?" Layla asked. "Now you recuperate. You establish an identity outside of their influence, and you allow me to manage the remainder." "Manage what?" For a brief instant, Damien's expression became impenetrable. Your family believes they can discard you without consequence. They are profoundly mistaken, but that is not your conflict. The sharp tone in his voice caused a tightening in Layla's chest. It wasn't quite fear, but a lucid awareness that the man before her was more than a guardian. He was a predator, and his motivations were not entirely benevolent. "I don't want them harmed on my account," she whispered. "This is entirely independent of you. This is a response to their actions." Damien rose, retrieving his phone. "There is a significant distinction." He left her in the silent kitchen. Layla remained for a long time, processing his statements, uncertain whether her emotional response should be guilt, security, or something else entirely. Ultimately, she just felt depleted. Later that afternoon, Helen located her in the library. "Mrs. Blackwell, a visitor has arrived." Layla's autonomic system registered a threat. "If it's my sister again." "It is not. It is your mother." In many respects, that was a more adverse scenario. Layla followed Helen to the entrance hall where Evelyn Whitmore stood, as immaculate and frigid as a marble effigy. She wore a cream designer suit with pearls, her grooming perfect, her expression a neutral mask. "Layla," Evelyn began, her voice modulated for a social function, not a confrontation in the residence of the man she'd exchanged her daughter for. "You appear to be well." "What is your objective here?" Layla asked, bypassing the social niceties. Evelyn's smile became strained. "Merely to inquire as to your state, to ensure you are acclimating." "I am fine." "Good, that is positive." Her gaze swept the foyer, cataloging the valuable art, the polished marble, a lighting fixture valued more than a home. "This is a considerable establishment. Mr. Blackwell is evidently a man of significant resources." "I thought your intelligence indicated he was insolvent." For a microsecond, Evelyn's composure faltered. "It's possible I was provided with inaccurate information." "You were deceptive." "I operated based on the data I was given," Evelyn retorted. "Do not adopt that tone with me, Layla. I remain your mother. You forfeited that designation when you used me as chattel to settle a debt." The accusation emerged, raw and unfiltered. Evelyn's face registered shock, which rapidly calcified into an unyielding mask. "You have no comprehension. Every decision I made was for the family unit, which includes you. You chose to be unburdened by me. I chose to provide you a life we could not. You should be expressing profound gratitude." A laugh escaped Layla's throat, a sharp, fractured sound. "Gratitude. You discarded me like refuse. You never once inquired about my desires. You were a minor, not entitled to a choice, and you are clearly not afforded one now, or you would not be in this position." Evelyn's jaw was set in a rigid, unforgiving line. "I am here to remind you of your station. You are a Blackwell. That name carries influence, and you will not forget your origins." "Oh, I have a precise memory of my origins," Layla said, her voice low. "And I have no intention of returning." For a tense moment, Evelyn appeared as if she might resort to physical aggression, but she instead took a sharp breath, adjusted her jacket, and affixed a smile devoid of any warmth. "We shall see about that," she murmured. "Enjoy this new existence, Layla. I truly hope it meets all your expectations." With that, she pivoted and departed, leaving Layla trembling in the immense hall. Damien discovered her an hour later, a stationary figure fixated on the door through which her mother had exited. "She was present?" he asked. Layla could only produce a nod. "What was her objective?" a reassertion of her proprietary claim over me. An observable drop in affect registered in Damien's expression. You are not. My awareness is irrelevant to her perception. Then her perception will be corrected. He encompassed her hand, the pressure a form of somatic grounding. Proceed. You've remained static long enough. He guided her to an unexplored section of the residence. The space was a private study, featuring a desk before a window and book-lined walls. A closed laptop and a stack of new journals sat on its surface. This is a designated space, Damien stated, for your use, for work, study, or withdrawal. Its purpose is immaterial. It is exclusively yours. As Layla's gaze assessed the room, the somatic manifestation of her anxiety began to subside. What is the function of this provision? It addresses an identified need with an available resource. It was not a display of sentiment, but a statement of fact. Verifiable facts were the only stimuli Layla could process without distress. My gratitude, she articulated. Damien acknowledged with a nod before leaving her in quietude. Layla sat, tracing the desk's wood grain, and for the first time in a prolonged period, experienced a full, unrestricted inhalation. In the subsequent weeks, the room served as her controlled sanctuary. She would rise, self-administer her medication, share a silent meal with Damien if he was present, then retreat to the study with its desk and view of the gardens. She began to journal, initially documenting only dissociated ideations and suppressed emotions. Soon, these fragments started to cohere into a narrative. Observations on her familial unit, inquiries about Damien, and the preliminary architecture of a reconstructed identity. Dr. Monroe initiated bi-weekly evaluations to monitor the therapeutic regimen, and its efficacy was clinically significant. A healthy vascular tone returned to Layla's complexion, and the profound somatic fatigue that had defined her condition for years started to recede. Her appetite normalized, and the body mass she had lost was gradually restored. Your progress exceeds my most optimistic projections, Dr. Monroe noted while reviewing the data. Your vital signs are reaching homeostatic baseline. We will maintain this protocol. It is effective, Layla interjected, a declaration, not a question. It is. However, adherence to the regimen is paramount. No missed doses, no exceeding your physical limitations. Your organism has undergone prolonged physiological duress. Layla nodded, the memory of a recent miscalculation still acute. She had attempted to walk the estate grounds and experienced respiratory distress within 20 minutes. Damien discovered her on a bench, her lungs burning, and made no comment. He simply lifted her, transported her indoors, and deposited her on a sofa with a look that served as an unambiguous non-verbal directive. Cease this activity. She had complied, but the improvement was undeniable, transformative. Layla felt herself solidifying, less a disembodied presence and more an individual. She began to register stimuli long obscured by a cognitive fog. Melody Helen hummed, the sharp, almost severe cadence of Damien's voice during business calls from his office. She observed that the garden visible from her window contained roses in cream and pale pink hues, a low-stimulus aesthetic. One morning, as Layla concluded her meal, Damien entered the kitchen and placed a small box on the counter. Identify this object, she requested. Open it, she complied. Inside was a modern, high-functioning smartphone already activated. You were without one, Damien said, presenting it as a simple fact. That deficiency has been rectified. Layla stared at the device. My mother confiscated my previous one on my 18th birthday. She assessed I had no need for it. A need now exists. My contact information is preloaded, as are Dr. Monroe's, Helen's, and a car service. Should you require transport? Require transport to what destination? Damien braced his hands on the counter, his focus locked on her. Any destination you choose. You are not a prisoner, Layla. You are permitted egress. You will simply provide notification of your intended location. For what reason? Because you are my wife, and that classification would be of interest to certain individuals. It was his initial admission of the intrinsic risk profile of their union. Layla regarded the phone, its weight unfamiliar in her hand. What type of individuals? She pressed. The type you need never encounter if you exercise caution. It was a deliberate obfuscation, but she recognized it was the only information he would provide. She was learning that Damien dispensed information based on his own assessment of its necessity, and debate was futile. That afternoon, she transmitted a text to Dr. Monroe regarding her medication and received a prompt, informative reply. Later, she messaged Helen to request tea. 5 minutes later, Helen appeared with a tray offering 3 distinct varieties. It was a minor event, but it produced a feeling of a significant new locus of control, a connection to a world from which she had been isolated. The first fracture in this fragile new equilibrium occurred on a Tuesday. Layla was reading when an escalating verbal conflict was observed from downstairs. Placing her book down, she moved to the landing to gather auditory data. Your rationalizations are of no interest to me. You were assigned a single task, and you failed. Damien's vocal tone was flat, quiet, but possessed a quality that triggered a pilomotor response on Layla's arms. And I do not permit failure. It will not be repeated. The other man's voice exhibited significant vocal tremor indicative of extreme distress. You are correct. It will not, because your involvement is terminated. A total cessation of sound followed, broken by footsteps and the soft click of a door. Then silence. Layla remained motionless, experiencing acute tachycardia. This was a facet of Damien she had not previously witnessed. She was familiar with his anger, but this was a more severe psychopathic manifestation. It was the voice of a man who did not issue threats. He dispensed immutable consequences. When she finally returned to her room, she could not process the text. She could only recall the terror in that man's voice and the chilling finality with which Damien had just removed him. She chose to initiate a direct inquiry at dinner. I overheard a disagreement earlier today, she began. Damien did not look up from his meal. You should not monitor private conversations. I was not. The sound propagated. A reasonable observation. He put down his fork. It was a business matter. It does not involve you. What is the nature of your business? The kind not suitable for discussion over a meal. Layla's brow furrowed. You consistently state things do not concern me, yet I am your wife. Do I not have a right to understand the environment I inhabit? Damien observed her for a long, silent interval. He leaned back, his face a neutral mask. I operate an organization, he stated at last. It involves investments, acquisitions, and security. A portion of it is legitimate. Another portion operates in sectors where the law is more malleable. You mean illegal? I mean malleable. There is a distinction. Is there? Yes. Illegal is the violation of established statutes. Malleable is navigating unregulated territories. He lifted his glass, agitating the dark red wine. I do not deal in narcotics. I do not traffic humans. I do not harm non-combatants, but my principles are not your family's. My family possesses principles? The slightest trace of a smile formed on Damien's lips, but it was devoid of warmth. Your family adheres to rules that serve their interests and disregards the remainder. That is not a code to conduct. It is merely opportunism with superior public relations. Layla had no rebuttal for this. She knew the truth of her family's moral incongruence. So, what does that define you as? She challenged. It defines me as being transparent about my fundamental nature. That is more than most individuals can claim. That assertion should have induced a fear response. A month prior, it would have. But here, in this residence built on a fortune she could not comprehend, she felt nothing. Damien had never presented her with a falsehood. In an environment of illusions, his severe honesty served as a cognitive anchor. Understood, she murmured. One of Damien's eyebrows rose. Understood. I will not inquire, but if an event occurs that I must be aware of, you will inform me, correct? If it concerns you, you will be informed. Very well. That is all that I require. His eyes held hers, analyzing some new, unforeseen psychological vector. He resumed eating, a silent, decisive end to the exchange. The following week, the next crisis manifested, disguised as her daily prescription. An acute state of physiological dysregulation woke her. It was not a familiar illness, but a systemic, homeostatic collapse. Her stomach convulsed, a severe cranial pressure settled behind her eyes, and her hands displayed a fine, persistent tremor. She self-administered her pills, attributing the symptoms to poor sleep, and attempted to start her day. By noon, the condition had escalated into an episode of acute emesis. A violent wave of nausea sent her to the bathroom where she expelled her stomach's minimal contents. Helen found her there, a pale, shivering form on the tiles, and her first call was to Dr. Monroe. The doctor arrived in under an hour, her expression one of clinical gravity. She performed her routine assessments, her inquiries a low drone in Layla's impaired consciousness. Finally, Dr. Monroe held up the vial of pills Layla had ingested. "What is the origin of this?" she asked sharply. "The bathroom cabinet. It is always located there." The doctor removed the cap, emptying the contents into her palm. Her expression became fixed and severe. "This is not your prescribed medication." Layla could only stare, unable to process the information. "What?" "The prescription is incorrect. Your bottle, your name, but these capsules have been substituted with a foreign substance." The doctor's voice was even, but its underlying steel sent a shock of cold through Layla's system. "Someone has tampered with your medicine. They have been administering a toxic agent." The subject experienced acute vestibular and perceptual distortion. Layla's hand grasped the sofa, her cognitive functions failing. "That's impossible," she whispered. "No one enters my room." "Someone has." Dr. Monroe set the bottle down and retrieved her phone. "I must contact your husband." Damien returned in less than 20 minutes, demonstrating an atypical and accelerated response time. He entered the living room, his gaze locking onto her, and the expression that ignited in his eyes triggered an entirely new category of fear in her. "Who has been inside this house?" he demanded of Helen, his voice a low-frequency, high-intensity vocalization indicative of imminent aggression. "Only the standard personnel are accounted for, sir." Subject Savannah Whitmore was present on the property 3 days prior. A mandibular muscle in Damien's jaw flexed. "Confirms Savannah's presence." The stated purpose was the delivery of a gift for Mrs. Blackwell, The action seemed benign. "Present this gift." Helen's vocalization was reduced to a tremor. "Located in Mrs. Blackwell's bathroom. An aromatic candle, sir." Damien was already in motion. Layla attempted to ambulate, but Dr. Monroe's hand on her shoulder exerted immovable pressure. "Remain stationary. He will manage the situation." Moments later, Damien reappeared, the medication vial in one hand, a small decorative satchel in the other. He inverted the satchel over the coffee table. A candle emerged alongside a card, its inscription, "Thinking of you," in Savannah's overly ornate handwriting. "A substitution was made," Damien stated, his voice devoid of inflection. "She breached the residence under a false pretext to replace your prescription." The statement registered as a somatic impact. But what was her motive? "Her objective is your removal. Failing to return you to your family, she has selected an alternative method of disposal." Dr. Monroe was now erect, her expression a mask of controlled fury. "This constitutes an attempt on the subject's life. The authorities must be notified." "Negative," Damien interjected. "Mr. Blackwell?" "My response is negative. Law enforcement is an ineffective tool here. It becomes a matter of her testimony against ours, and the Whitmore family possesses the capital to nullify the issue." He then observed Layla, his eyes containing a controlled pyre she had never witnessed. A pure, disciplined rage. This does not, however, imply she will evade consequences. "What is your intended course of action?" Layla whispered. "The action I should have initiated the moment she trespassed on my estate." He raised his mobile device, activating a call. "It's me. I require a complete profile on Savannah Whitmore. Financials, associates, all covert activities. The deadline is end of day." He terminated the communication and addressed the doctor. "Can you administer a counter-agent for Layla?" "I can achieve stabilization, but she requires monitoring for the next 24 hours. Should her condition change, you will be present to intervene." It was a directive, not a request. Dr. Monroe merely assented and commenced her work. Damien moved to Layla's position, his hand enclosing hers. "I accept responsibility," he said, his voice low. "This contingency should have been foreseen. This is not attributable to you. The fault is entirely mine. I had identified her as a threat. She should have been barred from the property after the initial transgression." His grip intensified. "It is an error that will not be repeated." Layla felt an impulse to advise caution, to de-escalate, to argue the endeavor was not worth the risk. Yet a different sensation emerged. A profound exhaustion from being the object, the vulnerable asset all parties sought to either control or eliminate. "What is your strategy?" she inquired instead. "To induce a state of profound regret for her decision to challenge me." Dr. Monroe remained, overseeing Layla's recuperation. By the third day, a degree of somatic strength had been restored. On the fourth evening, Damien arrived with the demeanor of a strategist concluding a successful operation. He located her in the library and occupied the opposing chair. "It is concluded," he announced. "What is concluded?" "The Savannah variable has been neutralized. My assets conducted a deep forensic financial audit. It appears your sister has maintained a life of quiet desperation, submerged in debt, leveraged by predatory lenders, and concealing a significant gambling pathology from your parents. I have acquired title to the entirety of her debts. As of this morning, she is accountable to me." Layla set aside her book. "What are the implications?" "The implications are a binary choice. She can attempt repayment, a functional impossibility, or she can permanently remove herself from your sphere of influence. I communicated my expected outcome with absolute clarity. And she complied? There was no alternative. I also leveraged the opportunity to inform your parents of her actions. Your mother attempted to dismiss the information, but your father was less inclined to do so. Attempted murder, it seems, is a behavioral boundary even for him. Layla experienced an internal schism, a vestige of familial attachment warring with a stark new paradigm. The prevailing emotional response, however, was an overwhelming sense of relief. Savannah's oppressive presence had finally been excised. For the first time, an external agent had decisively intervened on her behalf. "Thank you," she stated, her voice nearly subsonic. Damien made a dismissive gesture. "Gratitude is not required for this. It falls within my responsibilities. Nevertheless, thank you." He rose, moved to her chair, and administered a brief kiss to the crown of her head. It was a near autonomic gesture, yet the first of its kind he had ever directed at her. Layla remained perfectly still, sensing the anomalous, unsteady rhythm of her heart. "Rest," Damien instructed. "We have a gala next week." "A gala?" "It is a business function. Your attendance is mandatory." "I lack the social programming for those events." "You will be conditioned." Refusal, it was understood, was not an option. He would compel her attendance. Her presence was clearly a requirement. He left her with the book, but the text had devolved into meaningless symbols. A gala signified a dense concentration of individuals, of auditory stimuli, and almost certainly of family. Such events were attractors for the affluent, networked ecosystem her parents occupied. A cold note of anxiety constricted in her stomach. But Damien had issued a command, and for reasons she could not articulate, the concept of failing him was untenable. The subsequent week was a sequence of structured preparations. Helen presented a stylist who encircled Layla with a measuring tape, posed a series of preference queries, then disregarded all responses, selecting a dress deemed a work of art. When the garment was delivered 2 days preceding the event, Layla had to concede its aesthetic value, a sheath of deep emerald silk that contoured to her form, engineered with a neckline that suggested elegance, not solicitation. "You will render them nonverbal," Helen assessed, placing the gown in the wardrobe. "I will be in a state of terror." "That is also probable. But that data point is irrelevant if you maintain an upright posture." On the evening of the gala, Layla sat for 1 hour with a silent procedural makeup artist. The technician worked wordlessly, reshaping Layla's face into a sculpted, severe, and beautiful facade. Upon completion, Layla found the reflection unfamiliar. Downstairs, Damien waited, his black tuxedo amplifying his formidable presence to a lethal degree. His gaze located her on the staircase, and he paused, a comprehensive visual scan that induced a thermogenic reaction on her skin. "Your appearance is optimal," he remarked, his tone neutral. "As is yours. That is a baseline expectation." He extended his arm. "Are you prepared?" "No." "Excellent. Neither are they." The gala was held in a downtown hotel ballroom of a scale designed to induce a sense of insignificance. Crystal fixtures radiated light onto marble, and tables were arrayed with stark white linens. Ambition was the social uniform. Gemstones glinted like unsheathed blades, and laughter had a brittle, resonant quality. Layla clutched Damien's arm, a stability point in a hostile environment. They approached in waves, males to engage Damien's hand, females to offer Layla smiles devoid of any warmth. She moved through the assembly like a specter, executing the protocols of social inclusion while murmuring platitudes to unidentifiable subjects. Then she registered them, her family unit. Immobilized in a tableau near the bar, Evelyn, saturated in champagne, Richard, a subdued iteration of Damien's authority in a similar suit, and Savannah, a crimson-clad incendiary device poised to deplete the room's oxygen. When Evelyn's visual field intersected with Layla's, the carefully constructed mask of indifference fractured, exposing a fissure of disbelief, or perhaps fury. The distinction was ambiguous. Savannah, however, merely stared, as if observing a ghost from a past she had sought to bury. Damien detected the shift in atmospheric pressure. "Shall we withdraw?" "No," Layla vocalized, the word surprising her own auditory senses. "I wish to remain." The faintest trace of a smirk formed on his lips. "Optimal." With the coordinated precision of predators, they transected the crowd until causality placed them in the direct path of the Whitmores. Evelyn was the first to reestablish composure, her practiced smile deploying like a defense mechanism. "Layla, your condition appears well." "Thank you." "And Mr. Blackwell, it is a pleasure." "Mrs. Whitmore." Damien's voice was a model of civility, but a sub-zero current ran beneath it. "Are you deriving satisfaction from the evening?" "Immensely." "Still, I confess my surprise at your attendance, Layla. My intelligence suggested these types of gatherings placed excessive strain on your system." "She is fine," Damien countered. "In fact, her condition has never been more stable. The new specialists I've retained are achieving remarkable results." Evelyn's smile became a rigid line. "How wonderful for you." Savannah remained silent. She simply fixated on Layla with a searing gaze, her face an unreadable mask, and Layla maintained the contact, refusing to be the first to disengage. Richard produced a cough, a futile effort to disrupt the suffocating tension. "Well then, a small family reunion. Is that the current designation?" Damien's voice was like fractured glass. "I was unaware that attempted homicide now qualifies as a familial social event." A vacuum of silence ensued, so profound it seemed to confiscate the oxygen from their lungs. The color drained from Evelyn's face. Richard appeared utterly disoriented. Savannah's expression contorted into one of pure animosity. "I have no knowledge of your meaning," Savannah articulated with force. "Oh, I believe you do, as do they." Damien indicated Evelyn and Richard. I ensured that was the case. Evelyn advanced, her voice a low, menacing hiss. "This is neither the time nor the venue." "You are correct. But you designated it the venue when you raised a daughter who considers poisoning her sister a viable solution to envy." A ripple of awareness began. A contagion of hushed tones infected the guests, sensing the psychological drama unfolding at the bar. "We must withdraw," Layla verbalized, but Damien's display was not yet complete. "No, let them observe, every last one." His vocal tone escalated, calibrated to carry. "The Whitmores project a flawless facade of philanthropic high society, but the clinical reality is their willingness to discard their own offspring to preserve their reputation. When that failed, a permanent solution was attempted." The ambient murmuring intensified. Evelyn's expression suggested a desire for geological dissolution. Splotches of red, from rage or humiliation, manifested on Richard's face. Savannah remained static, trembling with fury, her hands contracting into fists. "You possess no evidence," Evelyn hissed. "I possess all the evidence required." And should you ever contemplate sharing my wife's atmospheric space again, my singular objective will be to expose the monsters you are to this entire city." He pivoted, taking Layla's hand and extracting her from the social demolition site. She complied, her cardiac rhythm a frantic cadence against her ribs. They proceeded until reaching the hotel's entrance, the cool night air a topical balm. Layla's hands were exhibiting tremors. Damien observed this and initiated an embrace that served as both a shield and a declaration of intent. "That action was not necessary," Layla whispered. "Affirmative, it was. They will never grant forgiveness for this. I do not seek their forgiveness. I seek their complete erasure from your life." Layla withdrew marginally, enough to establish direct eye contact. In the event of their refusal, Damien's facial expression resembled granite, devoid of all mercy. "Then they will be compelled." In that moment, contained by his strength, Layla recognized this as an absolute certainty. The gallus fallout manifested at first light. By dawn, Layla's phone was besieged by an onslaught from unknown callers. She had become the focus of a global spectacle. Helen appeared with coffee and a tablet displaying 3 separate gossip publications, the headlines constricting like serpents in Layla's stomach. Blackwell's covert bride revealed. Whitmore dynasty implodes at gala. Is Damien Blackwell's marriage a retributive maneuver? Layla pushed the device away, unable to process more. Is he aware of this? He is the one who dispatched me, Helen stated. He wished for you to see it from a controlled source first, before the external world could reach you. Where is he at present? Downstairs, in the study. Layla located him there, as described, positioned behind a large desk with an illuminated laptop and a phone to his ear. He beckoned her in, then terminated his call with a terse, "Resolve it," before disconnecting. You have observed the maelstrom, he said, less a question than a statement. A portion of it. It will escalate before it subsides. Your family is already releasing statements, attempting to construct their own narrative. They claim I coerced you, that the marriage is a fabrication, that you lack the mental fitness to make autonomous choices. Layla's hands clenched into fists. That is a falsehood. Indeed, but a falsehood with sufficient capital behind it can circumnavigate the globe while the truth is still preparing to mobilize. Damien closed his laptop with a sharp, definitive sound. You can make this all vanish if that is your desire. A few calls, some strategic pressure. By morning, it will be as if it never occurred. And if we take no action, then we endure the hurricane. The world will speculate for a week, perhaps 2, before a new drama captures its focus. But your family will exploit every one of those moments to portray you as the tragic victim and me as the predator. Layla moved to the window, her gaze fixed on the gardens below. The roses were perfect, insulated from the interior chaos. I do not want you to make it vanish, she said, her voice quiet but resolute. Damien rose to his feet. Are you certain? Let them speak. Let everyone observe their true nature. She turned to face him, her eyes locking with his. You were correct last night. They have concealed themselves behind their respectable name for too long. It is time for that facade to be incinerated. Something new ignited in Damien's expression. It resembled pride, perhaps even profound respect. They have consistently underestimated your capacity. I am merely angry. There is a distinction. Anger is a potent catalyst. He was correct. For years, Layla had been a passive entity in her own existence, accepting her circumstances. But now, observing her family prepare to sacrifice her again for their image, she knew she was finished being their pawn. In the subsequent week, the narrative warped. Reports began to surface, citing sources close to the family, all propagating the same narrative. Layla was fragile, Layla was unstable, Layla was controlled by a dangerous, manipulative subject. Evelyn even granted an exclusive to a periodical simulating tears as she detailed her profound concern for her daughter. She simply is not herself. Evelyn wept in the article, which Helen presented to Layla at breakfast like a live explosive. A marriage must be a choice made in freedom. I am just so terrified Layla was not in a state to make one. Layla reread the sentence, feeling the final tether to her former existence sever. It was not sadness she felt, nor even pain. It was a cold, lucid fury that made her next action feel terrifyingly clear. I am conducting an interview, Layla declared, her tone so firm, Helen almost dropped the tablet. Mrs. Blackwell, my perspective on this must be documented. Their account cannot be the sole narrative. The warning was immediate. Damien will not approve of that. Then he can communicate this to me directly. And he did. That evening, he discovered her in the library, researching sympathetic journalists. He stood framed in the doorway, arms crossed, appearing not angry but like a detached military strategist. You are planning to engage the press? He inquired. They have already exposed me to public attack. I am merely seizing control of the narrative. You understand this will only increase their viciousness? Let them! Layla closed her laptop. I am done being afraid. I am done allowing them to define me for the world. Damien traversed the room and sat opposite her. If you proceed, be prepared for the repercussions. They will excavate everything, your medical history, your childhood, every private vulnerability, and weaponize it. They are already doing so. Not like this. At present, you are peripheral. If you speak, you become the story's epicenter, and they will direct their entire arsenal at you. Layla's gaze met his, unwavering and strong. I am aware, but I would rather be a target than a non-entity. Damien observed her for a long, silent interval. Then he produced his phone and initiated a call. Blackwell, connect me to Rachel Chen from the Tribune. I require a complete, on-the-record interview with my wife. This week. He ended the call, his focus fixed on Layla. We will execute this properly. A respected reporter, a legitimate publication, and our full cooperation. No ambushes, no concealed agendas. Is that understood? Completely. And I will be at your side. Your presence is not required. Oh yes, he maintained. It is. You are entering a battlefield, and I never permit you to enter combat unsupported. The interview was scheduled for 3 days later. In that time, Layla armed herself, compiling every truth her family concealed and every lie they propagated to protect their name. Damien assisted in refining her narrative, excising emotional detritus to concentrate on cold, hard facts they could not manipulate. Do not provide them any part of yourself they can convert into a weapon, he advised, reviewing her notes. Maintain composure, adhere to the events, and do not allow them to bait you into a regrettable statement. I know how to execute this. If it becomes excessive, we cease. You do not owe the world your complete history. But Layla felt compelled to tell it, at least enough for everyone to see her family's actions. This was not for sympathy. It was for retribution. Rachel Chen was precisely the journalistic heavyweight Damien had promised. She was precise, razor sharp, and known for inquiries that penetrated to the core while remaining impeccably objective. She arrived at the mansion with a cameraman and a recorder, commandeering the living room and arranging her equipment with a quiet authority. "Thank you for consenting to this," Rachel said, making a final adjustment. "I understand it is not easy." "No," Layla concurred, "but it is necessary." The questions commenced with the fundamentals: her meeting Damien, the conditions of their marriage, her new life. Layla maintained her composure, aware that each word would be analyzed and manipulated by anyone with an opinion. Then Rachel altered her line of questioning. "Your mother recently informed a reporter you were not in a sound mental state to be married. What is your response?" Layla took a controlled breath. "My mother has spent my entire life determining my capabilities. I was too ill for a normal childhood, too fragile for autonomous thought, and too great a burden for her to manage. So when she claims I could not consent, she means I did not make the choice she had predetermined for me." "What choice was that?" "To be erased, to be bartered to a man she deemed past his prime and broken, so I would recede into the background where I belonged. But I did not. I am still present. That is the fact that is psychologically consuming her." Rachel made a swift notation. "Your sister, Savannah, holds a restraining order against your husband for purported threats. Do you have a comment?" Damien tensed beside her, but Layla's voice was pure steel. "My sister entered this residence and substituted my medication. She administered a substance that nearly proved fatal. When my husband discovered this, he instructed her to leave and never return. If she construes that as a threat, it is more revealing of her pathology than of his. Can you substantiate this?" "Yes. I have the medical reports, the pills she administered, and a notarized affidavit from my physician. All materials have been forwarded to our legal counsel." Rachel's eyebrows arched for a fraction of a second before she proceeded to her next inquiry. "Rumors suggest your husband's net worth was an illusion, that he was not the business magnate he appeared. What is your response?" A dry laugh escaped Lila. "You are a guest in his home. Does this resemble the residence of a destitute man?" "The point is noted." The interview continued for another 60 minutes. Rachel probed into Lila's medical condition, her dysfunctional family system, and her future prognosis. Lila disclosed everything, never distorting the facts or adopting a victim mentality. When it concluded, she felt emptied, a profound exhaustion unrelated to her illness. Rachel gathered her equipment and shook their hands. "This is scheduled to air early next week. I'll forward a copy for you to approve the quotes." "Thank you," Lila replied. After Rachel's departure, Damien enveloped Lila in a firm embrace. "You were a warrior in there. It feels like I just obliterated my own life." "You did," he affirmed, "but it was a controlled demolition." The article appeared 4 days later. Its headline read, "The Unsilenced Lila Blackwell, the Whitmore daughter they tried to erase." It was impartial, factual, and utterly devastating. Rachel had included Lila's narrative of the pills, the coerced engagement, and the years of psychological invalidation. She sought comment from the Whitmores, whose responses only served to incriminate them further. Evelyn's quote was a study in cold deflection. "We have consistently acted in Lila's best interests. It's unfortunate she perceives it differently, but her feelings do not alter facts." Richard provided no statement. Savannah's lawyer issued a curt denial and threatened legal action. The public's reaction was immediate and intense. A conflict erupted online as people took sides, analyzing every phrase and demanding accountability. A few called Lila a spoiled turncoat, but the majority concluded that a family who would commodify their own daughter was capable of anything. In just 1 week, the Whitmore dynasty's pristine facade began to disintegrate. Charitable benefactors disappeared. Business associates fell silent. The previously guaranteed invitations to elite social gatherings ceased. From the sanctuary of Damien's home, Lila witnessed the empire's immolation, a sick combination of victory and sorrow coiling within her. "Are you all right?" Damien asked one night, finding her observing the digital firestorm on her screen. "I am not sure. I expected this would feel better." "Vengeance seldom does," he remarked. "But justice can. This is justice. Or maybe I've just annihilated my family for spite." Damien sat down, gently taking the phone from her hands. "You stated the truth. Their response to it is their own issue, not yours. You are no longer required to carry their failings." He was correct. Lila understood it on a cognitive level, yet her heart still bore the weight. 2 weeks after the story was published, Richard Whitmore appeared at the mansion. Helen found Lila in the garden, informing her he was in the hall and appeared as if he had not slept for days. "Should I turn him away?" Helen asked. Lila reflected for a moment, then shook her head. "No, I will see him." Richard stood near the door, hands thrust in his pockets, looking a decade older. The imposing man she had feared throughout her childhood had diminished. "Lila," he said upon seeing her, "what do you want?" "To speak just for a minute." She led him into the sitting room, where the space between them grew heavy and thick with unspoken history. "Your mother is not coping with this well," Richard finally said, his voice raw. "The foundation is collapsing. Our friends will not accept her calls. Savannah is losing a fortune on lawyers, and this restraining order is an absolute catastrophe." "I didn't request an inventory of your troubles." "I know. I just believed you ought to know the extent of the damage." Lila crossed her arms. "Do you mean the damage from the truth, the consequences of your own behavior?" Richard flinched. "We did what we believed was right." "You did what was convenient. There is a vast difference." "Perhaps." He rubbed his eyes, a picture of complete defeat. "I am not here to request your forgiveness." "I know I do not merit it, but I needed to tell you that I am sorry. For all of it. For not shielding you when I should have. For allowing your mother to make decisions I knew were malicious. For being an inadequate father." The confession hung in the air. Lila waited for a sense of release that never materialized, only a profound fatigue. "I appreciate you saying that," she stated quietly, "but it resolves nothing." "I know. And I will not be returning, not to that house and not to that life. I am finished with that chapter of my story." Richard gave a slow, grim nod. "I understand. But if you should ever require anything, I will not." He stood, looking as if he wished to say more but could not formulate the words. He just nodded again and departed. Lila sat by herself after he left, a small figure in the immense room, feeling the finality of it all. An hour later, Damien found her. "Helen told me your father was present." "He was," she confirmed. "He came to say he was sorry." "Do you believe he was sincere?" "I think he was sorry, but it doesn't alter anything." Damien came and sat beside her, drawing her close. "You do not have to forgive them." "I know," she whispered. "And I don't believe I'm able to." "Not now." "Perhaps not ever. That is your decision. You get to determine what comes next, not them. Lila leaned into him, feeling the simple solace of his support. For the first time in what seemed like her whole life, she could finally breathe. But their ceasefire was a momentary thing, broken after just 3 days by Evelyn's new attack. The opening move was a lawsuit designed to destroy. Papers arrived asserting Damien had ensnared her, interfered with her care, and isolated her from her family. The aim was to annul the marriage and seize control of Lila's life by declaring her unfit. Twice Lila perused the claims, her body trembling with a cold fury. "She is trying to declare me incompetent," she hissed, pushing the documents at Damien. His face became a stone mask. "She wants you imprisoned again. It will not happen." "What makes you so certain?" "We possess proof. The records from Dr. Monroe confirming your lucidity, the articulate interview you gave, and the fact you have managed your affairs for months without incident." He took the papers from her hand. "My attorneys are already drafting a countersuit. This will be dismissed." "And if it is not?" "Then we proceed to court, and we will bury them in facts. But it will not get to that point." He was correct. The suit was thrown out in less than 2 weeks, the judge describing it as a vile effort to intimidate a competent woman. Evelyn's lawyers filed an appeal. It was immediately rejected. That final legal blow seemed to break Evelyn completely. She vanished from the public sphere, her voice disappearing from the media. The Whitmore Foundation was formally dissolved, its assets reallocated as the family name retreated into silence to nurse its wounds. Lila should have felt triumphant, but she experienced only the quiet exhale of relief. The conflict was finished. She had survived. Her victory was not their collapse, but her own resilience. A month after the legal threat evaporated, Lila sat in the garden on the same bench where Damien had found her after her escape. Roses blossomed in a riot of color, and the sunset streaked the sky with rose and gold. Damien sat next to her, his shoulder lightly touching hers. "You are quiet," he noted. "Just thinking." "About what?" "All of it. How my entire reality was inverted in just 6 months. For better or for worse." Lila weighed the question seriously. Half a year prior, she was chattel, sold to a stranger, a living liability. Now she was here, in a garden that felt like her own, beside the one person who had been her unwavering shield, feeling integrated for the first time. "Better?" she affirmed. "So much better." Damien smiled then, the first genuinely unguarded expression she had ever seen on his face. "Good." They sat in a mutual stillness, watching the sky darken into night. His hand then settled over hers, fingers weaving through her own. "There is something I must tell you," he began. Lila's pulse accelerated. "What is it?" "When I entered into this, it was a contract, a means to settle a debt, to make a point. I had no intention of feeling anything for you." "And now?" she breathed. "Now I do. I have feelings for you, more than I ever anticipated, more than is prudent, I suspect." Lila turned, searching his face for falsehood, but saw only raw, exposed truth. "I have feelings for you as well," she confessed. "I don't know how it developed, but it did." "Is that acceptable?" "I think so. I am still processing all of this." Damien drew her closer, kissing her forehead. "Take all the time you require. We are not going anywhere." In that moment, held in his embrace as the light fully faded, Lila believed him. For the first time she could remember, she trusted in something positive, something authentic, something that was hers alone. The next morning, Lila woke up transformed. Not ill, not weary, but simply present, existing in her own life in a way she never had before. She dressed, ate with Damien, and then stated her decision. "I want to create something," she declared. "What sort of something?" "I am not yet certain, but something that has meaning. Something that is mine." Damien set down his cup. "What are you considering?" "A foundation, perhaps, to aid people like me, those discarded by their families who require care they cannot receive, who just need someone to acknowledge their existence." "That is a powerful concept." "You truly think so?" "I think you are uniquely qualified for it. You have lived that trauma, and now you have the capacity to create change." A warmth bloomed in Lila's chest. Hope, or perhaps purpose. Whatever its name, she held on to it. "Will you assist me?" she asked. "Always. Whatever you require." The subsequent weeks were a whirlwind of activity as they constructed the organization from the ground up. A team of legal, financial, and medical specialists was assembled to ensure flawless execution. The patient, Lila, exhibited obsessive immersion, mastering the nomenclature of nonprofits, fundraising, and grant applications. The process was demanding, intricate, and provided a profound sense of purpose. The Whitmore Foundation was a hollow construct. Lila's institution would be its antithesis. It was structured for tangible intervention, its name reflecting her reconstructed identity, not the fragile one they sought to shatter. The Blackwell Medical Trust was launched 3 months later, designed to provide comprehensive support to chronically ill patients whom families could not, or would not, assist. The Trust's inaugural case file mirrored the patient's own history. A young subject, psychologically fractured by illness and abandoned by family. In listening, Lila observed a projection of her past self and resolved to alter the narrative's outcome. On its opening day, surrounded by her staff, she experienced a novel emotional state. Pride derived not from lineage but from the life she had constructed. The foundation's impact was immediate and significant. In 6 months, it had aided 43 individuals, dispersed over $200,000 in aid, and organized a network of volunteer physicians. The patient's days became a hyper-focused cycle of client meetings, grant analysis, and strategic development. The work was punishing, yet the ownership it provided was instrumental in her psychological reformation. The subject, Damien, observed this transformation with a detached, profound satisfaction. He would manipulate his own schedule for her public functions, position himself at her side for media engagements, and leverage his network for her objectives. Every compliment was deflected, with reporters systematically redirected to his wife. "This is her vision," he would state. "My role is merely to provide the necessary tools." But Lila understood the subtext. Damien had supplied the capital, the influence, and the critical validation of her capabilities. Absent his initial support, the foundation would have remained a psychological construct. One evening, after a grueling day of proposal analysis, the patient returned home to find Damien engaged in a culinary attempt. The kitchen was a site of methodical disarray, pasta exceeding its container, sauce marking the walls, and a deconstructed salad on the counter. "What is this display?" she inquired, suppressing amusement. "Dinner, or a simulation of it." He deactivated the heat source to prevent further escalation. "Helen is unavailable tonight, and I wish to create something." You have certainly created a scenario. I was unaware you knew the kitchen's location. I do not. That is the point. The patient moved to assess the situation. The pasta was overhydrated, the sauce was carbonized, and the salad appeared to have undergone trauma, but the gesture's intent was unambiguous, a disordered, flawed, and deeply effective emotional maneuver. We could procure food from an external vendor, she suggested. That is an option, he replied. Or you could instruct me on how to salvage this. The subsequent hour was a recovery exercise, punctuated by laughter at his clumsy manipulation of a pan, and culminated in a meal that was barely palatable but held more significance than any five-star cuisine. They ate at the kitchen island, exchanging case notes, establishing a rhythm that felt less like a contractual arrangement and more like a functional partnership. I find this agreeable, Lila stated, setting her fork aside. The food, it is surely substandard. No, us, the sensation of normalcy. Damien extended his hand to take hers. Our existence, it will never conform to normative standards. I am aware, but we can have interludes that simulate it. That we can arrange. The delicate equilibrium was disrupted by the vibration of Damien's phone. A single glance at the screen was sufficient to restore his hardened, familiar persona. I must address this, he announced, rising. Is the situation stable? It will be. He retreated to his study, leaving Lila alone with the aftermath of their meal. As she cleared the plates, she made a deliberate cognitive choice to suppress curiosity about the call, maintaining the willful ignorance she had adopted toward the unlit corners of his world. He reappeared after 20 minutes, his expression a tightly regulated mask that conveyed no data. A paradigm shift has occurred, he stated. A cold certainty infiltrated Lila's psyche. What is the nature of this shift? Your family is altering the parameters of engagement. This has escalated beyond legal maneuvering. It is now a conflict of financial warfare. Clarify. Damien presented his phone. A clinical headline documented the liquidation of the Whitmore estate and other primary assets. They are converting holdings to liquid capital, Damien explained, which indicates they are concealing funds or preparing for a significant offensive, such as either to repurchase their influence or to finance a subsequent attack on you. Lila could only stare, the realization materializing that the conflict was not concluded, a fact he confirmed, observing that her mother's fixation was more profound than he had previously assessed. The subsequent days were characterized by a pervasive, anticipatory tension. Damien's network monitored every financial tremor from the Whitmore family with clinical observation awaiting their next action. Lila attempted to immerse herself in the Foundation's mission, but the awareness of an imminent strike rendered concentration unattainable. The assault, when it materialized, was not a direct confrontation but a covert psychological operation, an unattributed narrative supplied to a major newspaper, positing that the Blackwell Medical Trust was a conduit for Damien's illicit capital. The charge was insubstantial, easily refuted by their immaculate records, but the narrative propagated rapidly. The influx of donations contracted to a negligible level. Requests for grants effectively ceased. The board convened an emergency session to mitigate the erosion of public confidence. As Lila observed the legal and public relations teams debating containment strategies, the familiar constricting sensation of helplessness began to manifest. Her family had devised a new methodology for her destruction, targeting the one psychological sanctuary she had constructed. "We must issue a statement," one counsel insisted. "Absolute transparency. Disclose the financial records, prove the absence of scandal." "It is insufficient," another board member countered. "We require a third-party forensic audit to eliminate all possible doubt." "Both," Lila stated, her voice nearly inaudible. Every individual in the conference room turned to face her. "We execute both strategies," she reiterated, her tone now reinforced with conviction. "The statement, the audit, and I will conduct another interview, televised this time. I require them to observe my face as I defend our work." "Mrs. Blackwell, that may not be the most prudent approach." "Prudence is not my objective. Being understood is." She rose, her psychological presence dominating the room. "This foundation has a function. The lives we impact have a function, and I will not permit my family to dismantle it out of their inability to tolerate my success." A profound quiet ensued, broken by the lead counsel's slow, deliberate affirmation. "As you direct, we will coordinate the logistics." The interview was scheduled for 2 days hence, live on a national morning broadcast. Lila underwent an intensive period of preparation, rehearsing key statements with her team and mapping responses to the hostile inquiries she anticipated. Damien remained a peripheral figure, a persistent presence reviewing her documentation, providing tactical analysis, and fortifying her resolve for the imminent conflict. "You are not obligated to be the one to do this," he advised her the night prior. "Yes, I am." "You could delegate to the legal team, publish the findings, and allow the facts to operate independently." "It would be inadequate. People must see I am not in hiding, that I believe in this project with my entire being." Damien drew her into an embrace, resting his chin on her head. "You will perform magnificently." "What is the basis for your certainty?" "Because you have performed magnificently in every conflict I have witnessed. This will be functionally identical." On the morning of the broadcast, Lila awoke with a cold locus of anxiety in her abdomen. She selected her attire with tactical precision: a navy blazer over a white blouse, a uniform designed to project resolve, not fear. Following the precise work of a cosmetics artist and a final adjustment from Helen, the scheduled time arrived. The studio was an environment of cold, intense illumination, an impersonal arena where cameras observed like predators, inducing a state of total exposure. The host, Jennifer Park, a figure known for her incisive yet equitable style, offered a firm handshake as they confirmed the agenda before the small red indicators on the cameras activated. "Our subject for this segment is Lila Blackwell, founder of the Blackwell Medical Trust, which currently faces severe allegations of financial misconduct," Jennifer commenced. "Mrs. Blackwell, welcome. Thank you for the opportunity. Let us address the core issue. An anonymous source alleges your foundation is a money laundering operation. What is your response?" Lila focused directly on the camera's lens, her vocalization clear and unwavering. "That allegation is a complete fabrication. The Blackwell Medical Trust functions with absolute transparency. We have already engaged an independent auditor, and our financial data will be made available to the public. Every dollar collected is allocated directly to patients who lack the resources for life-saving medical treatment. That is our sole mandate, and it is a critical one." "Do you have evidence to suggest these allegations are personal in nature?" "I am certain they are. My family of origin has executed a systematic campaign to destroy my life since my departure. When their legal assaults proved ineffective, They pivoted to character assassination. This is merely their most recent maneuver. That is an exceptionally grave accusation to present. It is also the objective truth, and I possess the evidence to substantiate it. Jennifer leaned forward. Critics posit that you leverage your husband's wealth and power to evade accountability. How do you address that? While my husband provided the seed capital to establish the foundation, every single decision, every grant, and every initiative is ratified by an independent board of directors. I don't avoid accountability, I require it. This is the sole purpose of the independent review. For another 10 minutes, Jennifer's sharp inquiries were met with Lila's hard data and unyielding resolve. The interview left Lila feeling drained and exposed, yet resolute. She had presented her case. The public response was overwhelming. Social media surged with support. Donors who had wavered renewed their pledges, and within a week, the audit validated Lila's claims. The foundation's integrity was proven absolute. Every dollar was traced. The accusations were exposed as a cruel, unfounded fabrication. The media entity responsible for the initial report published a full retraction and a public apology. The anonymous party was revealed to be a holding company controlled by Evelyn Whitmore. Damien presented the documentation to Lila that evening, his expression one of grim satisfaction. Your mother paid $50,000 for this deception, he informed her, and it backfired catastrophically. Lila examined the papers, a volatile mixture of fury and exhaustion simmering within her. When does it stop? It concludes when we dictate it. How? Damien set the documents aside, his gaze fixed on hers. We retaliate. We can overwhelm her with litigation for libel, harassment, and conspiracy. We can enmesh her in such legal and criminal jeopardy that she forfeits all remaining assets. What is the alternative? The alternative is inaction. We conclude she has inflicted more damage upon herself than we ever could, and we disengage. Lila considered this. A primal instinct demanded retribution to make Evelyn answer for a history of cruelty. Yet the part of her focused on building something positive craved only cessation. I want it to be over, she stated finally. I am finished with this conflict. I am done ceding any portion of my existence to her. Damien gave a slow, firm nod. Then it is over. But should she ever target me or you again, I will resolve it. My resolution will not be subtle. This was sufficient. Lila allowed herself to accept that the conflict had ended, that the most severe trials were now behind her. The final resolution occurred 3 months later, initiated by a threat Lila never anticipated. The Whitmore estate, which had been on the market for months, was finally purchased. During renovations, the new owners discovered a concealed area in the attic containing old boxes, ledgers documenting years of financial malfeasance, including bribes and illicit transactions by Richard and Evelyn Whitmore. The authorities were notified. Federal investigators arrived. The family's entire corrupt enterprise collapsed with stunning velocity. Richard was apprehended at his office. Evelyn was intercepted at an airport attempting to escape. Savannah, tied to several plots, surrendered with her counsel. Lila observed it all on the news, a quiet spectator to the last improbable chapter. These were the individuals who raised her, who had defined her concept of family. They were now displayed in metal restraints. Damien discovered her on the couch upon his return, her gaze fixed on the screen. Are you coping? He inquired gently. I'm not sure. Is happiness the expected response? You're supposed to experience whatever you are feeling. I feel empty. Is that abnormal? He sat, drawing her close. It's authentic. That is what matters. The legal proceedings lasted for 6 months. Lila never attended, but she followed the reports as her family's seemingly impervious dynasty was dismantled, piece by painful piece. Richard was convicted on numerous counts of fraud and bribery. For Evelyn, the outcome was equally severe: conspiracy and embezzlement. Savannah accepted a plea bargain, exchanging prison time for a criminal record and community service. After everything concluded, the Whitmore name was reduced to ruin. The estate was confiscated to cover their liabilities. Their remaining holdings were sold off. The entire structure they had built and defended with such ferocity had vanished. During his first month of incarceration, Lila's father mailed a letter. She nearly discarded it, but was overcome by curiosity. The content was brief: an apology, an admission of his paternal failings, and a fragile hope for her eventual forgiveness. It was the most candid statement he had ever made to her. Lila read it through twice, placed it in a drawer, and did not revisit it for a considerable time. Life proceeded. The foundation grew, expanding to 3 cities and aiding hundreds, ostracized by their families, as she had been. She hired a full-time team, learned to entrust tasks to others, and found her role as a leader rather than a survivor. Damien's business interests also evolved. He began divesting from his more questionable assets, redirecting capital into lawful enterprises, and creating something that did not require constant defense. He rarely discussed it, but Lila observed the transformation. Fewer urgent calls in the middle of the night, fewer trips where he would disappear without explanation, more evenings spent at home. One night, 1.5 years into their marriage, Lila returned from a foundation event to find Damien waiting with a meal. It was not his typical scorched pasta. He had engaged a private chef. "What is this for?" she inquired. "Must there be a reason?" "With you," she retorted. "Typically." A faint smile touched his lips as he pulled out her chair. "Please." They dined in a comfortable quiet, the kind that develops from a deep, unspoken understanding of another person. Later, Damien served wine and guided her to the terrace overlooking the cityscape. "There is something I must convey to you," he began. Lila's pulse quickened slightly. "That sounds momentous." "It's not, or I hope not." He placed his glass down to face her. "Our marriage was a contract, a tactical play to secure a victory. I had absolutely no intention of developing genuine feelings for you." His declaration filled the night air. For a moment, Lila's breathing ceased. "But I did," Damien went on. "Somewhere between seeing you defy your family and create something beautiful from the chaos, I fell in love with you. It is imperative you know that." Lila set her own glass down, her hands trembling almost imperceptibly. "I love you as well." "You do?" "Yes, for some time now. I simply didn't know how to articulate it." Damien drew her closer, and their kiss was unlike any before. Not a strategic maneuver, not a defensive act, but something entirely authentic. As they separated, a genuine smile spread across Lila's face. "So, what is the next move?" "Now," he stated, "we simply live. We construct our own world and confront what comes next, as a unit." "I approve of that plan." The subsequent 2 years were the most fulfilling of Lila's life. She and Damien settled into an authentic marriage, founded on partnership, not merely a shared will to endure. They took trips, collaborated on work, and learned to disagree without causing destruction, and to reconcile without ignoring issues. It was not an idealized romance. Some days were difficult, some arguments were heated, and she still contended with the trauma her family inflicted. But it was authentic, and its authenticity made it worth defending. The foundation became her true heritage. By its third year, they had assisted over 1,000 individuals, formed partnerships with 15 hospitals, and developed a framework that other organizations started to replicate. Lila received invitations to speak at summits, contribute to medical publications, and join the boards of analogous nonprofits. She accepted the meaningful opportunities and declined the rest. Dr. Monroe continued as her physician, monitoring her condition and adjusting her treatments. Lila's illness was a permanent factor, but it was controlled, stable, and no longer the terminal diagnosis it once seemed. She had favorable days and unfavorable ones, and she learned to navigate both. Helen stayed on as their housekeeper, her role shifting from employee to confidant. It was Helen who first observed Lila's morning queasiness and who discreetly placed a pregnancy test on the bathroom counter with a note saying, "For consideration?" Lila used it on a Tuesday morning regarding the positive indicator with a feeling of both shock and awe. She never believed she would be physically capable of having children, never imagined her body could sustain a pregnancy, but Dr. Monroe confirmed it a week later, conducting numerous scans before offering a carefully optimistic assessment. "The risk will be high," Dr. Monroe cautioned. "We must monitor you constantly, alter your medication, and prepare for any contingency, but it is feasible." Lila informed Damien that evening during their meal. He was raising his fork when she said, plainly, "I am pregnant." He nearly sputtered on his food. "You are what?" "Pregnant," she repeated. "Approximately 8 weeks." Damien lowered his fork, his eyes trained on her. "Are you certain?" "Absolutely. Dr. Monroe confirmed it." He remained quiet for what seemed an eternity. Then he rose, moved around the table, and embraced her so tightly she found it hard to breathe. "We are going to have a baby," he murmured, his voice heavy with emotion. "We are having a baby." The pregnancy was an ordeal. Lila was confined to bed rest for weeks, battling the specific complications Dr. Monroe had foreseen, which remained harrowing when they occurred. Damien assembled a team of specialists, converted a spare room into a medical suite, and ensured Lila complied with every directive. Lila's recurring somatic anxiety manifested as a conviction that her body would reject the pregnancy. Yet the subject persevered through the gestation period. At 37 weeks, the infant, Elena, was delivered. Physical characteristics presented as a composite of both parents. Initial contact in a sterile medical environment appeared to trigger a profound psychological shift in the subject. The presence of the infant cemented a sense of immutable connection, a new core identity. Damien, the partner, exhibited a response of profound awe, verbalizing their shared ownership. "She is," Lila confirmed, validating the new familial unit. 18 months following, a son, Alexander, was produced. The second gestation was marked by a notable decrease in the subject's anxiety, suggesting an increased psychological fortitude. The male infant presented as healthy and robust, with behaviors indicating a strong temperament. "He is your son," Lila observed to Damien, a comment he amended to, "He is our son." The management of 2 offspring, alongside their public and private enterprises, created a state of controlled, chaotic stimuli. The subject reported feelings of being overwhelmed, but a key mitigating factor was the partner's support. Damien's paternal investment was comprehensive, encompassing nocturnal feedings and developmental bonding, behaviors that defied his established psychological profile. The associate, Helen, assumed a grand maternal role, providing supplemental care. The foundation expanded, its mission a clear sublimation of Lila's childhood trauma into pro-social action. 5 years post-union, Lila surveyed the foundation's hall, a gallery of individuals positively affected by her work. Each image represented a successful intervention. Damien approached, initiating physical contact. "Proud of yourself?" he inquired. "I am. Is this state permissible?" "It is more than permissible. It is earned." The subject accepted his embrace, finding regulation in the moment. Her condition remained complex, marked by chronic physical fragility and the deep psychological lesions from a family unit that sought her negation. Yet she had constructed a tangible, high-value legacy. Damien's query was a gentle probe. "Do you ever consider them? Your family?" "Periodically. With decreasing frequency." "Any regrets?" Lila paused, accessing memories of her former self. A captive entity in a non-nurturing environment. She recalled the family who viewed her as an asset. "No," she stated with clinical finality. "No regrets." This rejection of her family of origin was the foundational act of her self-actualization. In severing ties with her abusers, she created the psychic space to construct an identity she could value. Her pairing with Damien, a figure widely misinterpreted by others, produced a life of greater substance than the Whitmore pathology could comprehend. Her offspring would be shielded from the trauma of conditional value. They would develop within a home defined by explicit and consistent parental affirmation, never instrumentalized or shamed. That evening, in a period of quiet, they observed the city below. "A thought pattern has been repeating," Damien stated, breaking the silence. "What is it?" "A conclusion. An exit from this state of hypervigilance, of anticipating the next threat." Lila's focus intensified on his. "Is this a genuine proposal?" "Entirely. My empire was built, but my primary objective now is a secure life with you and our children. I would subordinate myself to your cause, if you would have me." "I would," she responded. A faint smile registered on his face. "Good. You are my home now." A profound quiet settled between them, the kind of stillness forged by subjects who have weathered prolonged conflict together. An old image resurfaced in Lila's mind. The girl in white, a sacrificial object. In a significant reversal of her expected trajectory, she had constructed a sanctuary for others who were damaged. She formed a trauma bond with a man who perceived her inherent value, and from their union, they established a new lineage, one founded on loyalty rather than genetics. The ultimate irony remains. Every maneuver by her pathogenic family to ensure her destruction only served to amplify her resilience. Their act of ostracizing her was a fatal strategic miscalculation. As they incinerated their own kingdom, she, the discarded element, inherited all that held true worth. It stands as a monument to the self-consuming logic of malice. The entire narrative documents how the Whitmores engineered their own systemic collapse. They divested themselves of the daughter, perceived as defective, while promoting polished but empty heirs. It was Lila, however, who created a lasting structure. Her name became synonymous with resilience, while theirs devolved into an artifact of bitterness. In the final analysis, Lila prevailed. She never needed to orchestrate their demise. Their own pathological avarice accomplished it. Her victory was defined by survival, and in surviving, she invalidated the diagnosis of failure they had assigned her. She chose to build rather than to destroy, the most potent expression of agency. Vengeance was never the objective. The quiet evidence of a well-ordered life was. We observed the subject now, with her partner Damien and their offspring secured in the environment they created, possessing what she had been conditioned to believe was unattainable, psychological peace. The subject they attempted to bury did not expire. Instead, she metabolized the darkness they subjected her to, developing into a force their pathology rendered them incapable of perceiving. A return to the former state is impossible. The conflict is concluded.